Okay, well, it is 2 o'clock Eastern time. So for the purpose of time, we're going to get started today. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Jessica DeGraaf, and I'm the Director of Retail Accounts here at Proven Winners. I'm just so happy to have you here with us today, especially during a holiday week when we know you're very busy as you're getting ready for holiday sales. You're probably already in the midst of holiday sales, but really wanted to sort of get you thinking about planning for spring of 2023. So my role at Proven Winners and the role of my colleague, Heather Poire, is to help independent garden centers like yours, to help you to better leverage the support tools and the marketing programs that the Proven Winners brand offers. But more than that, to really help you to engage with consumers and drive those consumers to your garden center as the source for knowledge, for inspiration, and for not just Proven Winners plants, but all plants in general. So before we get kicked off today, I wanted to share just a few housekeeping items, and then I'm going to introduce our speaker for our webinar today as well. So before we get started, just a couple things. All attendees are going to be in listen-only mode. I know you guys have done the drill for the last few years with Zoom and webinars. That said, we absolutely do want to interact with you. So if you have questions, if you have comments, please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A icon on the bottom of your screen. We'll have folks that are going to be monitoring that, as will Clint and I, as we go through. And a couple things that I did want to mention to you is that this webinar, and frankly, all of our webinars, are recorded. And so you can access the webinar recordings about a week after they're completed at the website link that you see on the screen, provenwinners.com/IGC webinar series. If you haven't joined our webinars, if you haven't taken a peek at those, we have some great industry experts that we've brought to take part. And we have another great industry expert with us today. I know many of you know Clint Albin. Clint has been a close friend of mine, a close friend of the Proven Winners brand, and really, frankly, a close friend of independent garden centers. Clint has really, truly championed independent garden centers across North America, really looking at how to help them to be better. And so, throughout his career, Clint has created a dynamic personal and professional network of growers and operators who have a common goal. And that common goal is to make plants important to every single person in North America. He believes that the greatest category growth will come when it's consumer facing to all 330 million Americans and readily available, 52 weeks a year. So today, we have the pleasure of literally picking Clint's brain, asking a lot of questions. One of the things that Clint does, there's a lot of things on the screen, and Clint, I'll let you talk more about what you've done, but Clint is a retail strategy expert for Homestead Gardens, and Homestead has 3 locations in Maryland and Delaware, and truly are leading garden centers, in North America. But Clint has a lot of experience and knowledge, and so today he's going to be sharing really some, I think, thought leadership as we move forward into not only 2023, but into the future, 2024 and 2025. So, Clint, I'd love to kick it off and let you maybe speak a little bit about some of the things that you've done, and then maybe a little bit of an introduction into who is Homestead Gardens for those that aren't familiar.
Jessica, thank you so much. And thank you to all the people who've taken time out today to join us from all across the country. Jessica and I were just talking about the fact that it's Thanksgiving week, and it's amazing to actually be here in Maryland, right outside Washington, D.C., and see the trucks of Christmas trees that are here, and all the ornaments and Christmas lights and everything here for families to experience. We were just with the ECGC group last week in Minneapolis, and all those garden centers are ready. So for all the garden centers out there that are ready for Christmas and the holiday season, I wish you the best of luck. And it is so great to be here. And Jessica, thank you, and thanks to all of your team for the support that you've given Homestead, throughout the years. But as you say, I work in retail strategy for Homestead Gardens, and Homestead will celebrate its 50th year in business next year in 2023. So it's back in 1973 that the company was founded here in Davidsonville, Maryland, which is about 25 miles outside Washington, D.C. to the east, by Don Riddle. And our president today, and Riddle continues the tradition of being a retailer first company in really providing a professional retail experience for consumers here in the Mid-Atlantic area. So as you mentioned earlier, we have 2 retail locations here in the state of Maryland, or here in Maryland, one in Davidsonville and one in Severna Park. We also have a new location in Smyrna, Delaware, and we have a great team of people. One of the things that makes Homestead so exciting is just the longevity of all the employees. So everyone supports the brand and finds it very exciting. And so I look forward to seeing how I can continue to convey some of the things that we've been working on at Homestead, and love the idea that, we can give some ideas to other people and always look forward to helping.
Yeah, that's great, Clint. And one of the things I wanted to share was just a few, a collage of photos. I know Homestead has been a longtime partner of the brand, but I think some of the things that you've done with the brand has been really fun and unique. And we had the opportunity, actually, believe it or not, for those of you on the call, we went out in May and had some time to actually spend with the Homestead Gardens folks when they were at their busiest. And so I just wanted to share a few of the displays, and maybe let Clint talk for a minute or two about some of the things that they've done over the past year with their merchandising and with the brand.
So I'll tell you, Jessica, and I want to make sure, as every good consultant does in strategist, they certainly help everybody understand, where they come from. And I guess I give a shout out to Judy Sharpton, who has worked for so long with Proven Winners in talking about the store within a store concept. And so what you're looking at here in the picture to the left, we actually did it a little differently than, the way we had been doing sort of our store within a store in the past. So we were more segregated before. And after working with you this past year, we actually did a much larger footprint. And we did a fully integrated store within a store, where we sort of took our blinders off, and instead of sort of segregating things between perennials and shrubs and annuals, we actually had a much more free-flowing format. And then, of course, we used the large banners to signify the difference. But it really showed very well all throughout the greenhouse as well as the outside. We used that as a connecting period. And then, of course, in the middle there, you see Brian Riddle, who is the president and the CEO of Homestead Gardens, as well as my colleagues, Heather and Tom and Nina and Deb, with you and Heather, who are there as well. But we are excited to support the brand. And this has been an initiative that we feel the fully integrated store within a store are really sort of relieving kind of that walls concept, really helped to promote the brand this year and to bring a greater number of consumers all the way through our outside sales area.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Clint. So we're not going to talk about the store within a store in a lot of detail today, but I wanted to dig into some of the things that I really, truly think make Homestead unique in terms of their thought leadership in the IGC channel. And Clint and I wanted to talk a little bit about a checklist of sorts of what are some of the things that you, as you're thinking about 2023, and frankly, even into the future, what are some things that you can be really working on, and what are some opportunities moving forward? And so this next slide has a lot of information. And so Clint and I are going to kind of dig into this and start pulling nuggets out. But Clint, I want you to talk a little bit about, we hear the number 18 million new consumers, and it's thrown around a lot. But at the end of the day, what does it really mean, and how do we capitalize on that?
So I think this is the biggest question that so many people are asking. And I think we've got to go back to sort of the root of looking at what happened during the pandemic that brought those 18 million people to us. And then if those people are not continuing to stay with the category or the channel, how do we actually begin to move things around? We have to continually remind ourselves that as businesses during the pandemic and then even last year, that we were lucky, right? Because we actually had something that people needed to survive. And it really shows the idea that, once again, we could be involved in an industry that creates automotive parts. It could be something that deals with metal or asphalt or other things. But we don't, because we've actually chosen to be a part of a category and a part of a line of goods that do good for people. Like, we really are a part of the solution. We really have things that can change people's lives. And I think that was the dynamic that happened in 20 and 2021. And as we've sort of gone through this bumpy phase over the last couple of years with changes in supply chain, looking at availability, looking at the ups and downs of whether it is gas prices, whether it is the ups and downs of how inflation would sort of work either at the micro level or the macro level. We have to remember that we have great stuff, and we have to continue to talk about that and how people can connect and heal.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we hear a lot of the buzzwords of really looking at the benefits of plants, right? Stop talking about, I know Dr. B, he always talks about, stop talking about the features of the plant. While those are important, what really sells the plant are the benefits. And I think this really plays to that.
Exactly. And I think that, one thing that I'll point out, and as I sort of talk about up here, looking toward 2025, I think that while we are in November of 2022 right now, that a part of the focus that people have to realize is that we're still in a transitional period in consumer horticulture. And again, even though we have 52-week companies, even though we're open 52 weeks of the year, the major portion of our goods and services are actually sold in the springtime. Mm-hmm. So we have to normalize the idea that when we talk about sort of where we're going in the trajectory of that, we really have to base it on the 16 weeks of spring, however that flows in your area. So I think that we're going to be into 2025 before things normalize. But there are things that people have to do as we go forward. And, one of the things that I think is very important is number 6 under the part on the right-hand side, that, the same reason that people came to us during the pandemic and that they asked questions about plants or they needed an outlet, our employees, consumer facing into the future, we're going to be healers and solvers. We are not just people who work in another retail format. And once we begin to look at that helps us to identify the types of team members that we need. That helps us to build out sort of how we want to spend our time and our effort, and then where we need to modernize the way that we go with materials handling. So I think it's a very exciting time in consumer horticulture because we still have a lot of great stuff in front of us. And even though we're in a bit of a dip right now, I believe all that's going to change because we have stuff that's really going to make people's lives better.
Yeah, I agree, Clint. So you talked about number 6, that consumer-facing employees will self-identify as healers and solvers. And I think one of the unique things, because labor is a big issue, right? We get a lot of questions about that. There's a lot of concern about that. It's been difficult for many folks in different areas of the country to actually hire. But I think one of the things that you do that's very unique, and one of the things that Heather Wheatley, who's at Homestead Gardens, is responsible for and does an amazing job of, is not just consumer-facing education, but staff education. Do you want to dig into that a little bit and explain, really, I think it's thought leadership in the fact that you've invested so much time and money and resources into your employees to help them to become a healer and a solver for your customers.
Exactly. And that is one of the things that is a commitment, in professional development. And so often when companies think about professional development, they really sort of categorize that as being something that happens outside the company. When in reality, we need to be doing a lot of internal education. But as you mentioned, Heather, she oversees a great professional development program for Homestead Gardens, including a plant ID class. So a part of the plant ID class that we have happens in the wintertime. So it's January, February, and March. And one of the things that, and I know we talk about sort of all plants, but with respect to proven winners, we're actually able to utilize the image gallery, utilize the plant data, utilize all of those sort of training techniques. So in addition to being a part of the Certified Garden Center program, Heather actually takes the full plant list that we will be selling in the springtime. And she creates that document so that we can actually help people understand the minute details of these plants. Because, when somebody's putting in a hydrangea, which is different than putting in a petunia, it's a commitment because, it's not a 6-inch area or 12-inch area. It is a 2-foot area or a 6-foot area. And the more that we can solve people's problems by helping them find that right hydrangea, that perfect plant that it is going to provide beauty and provide solstice and not be a source of a problem in the future, the better off we all are. But Heather does an amazing job. And, she has ongoing training sessions. But yes, we really try to train people on plant ID and plant health.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. The other bullet point, and I know there's a lot of items on the list, and there's a lot of things as we look at what potentially is going to happen or may happen as we move forward into 2025. I think the big thing that is on a lot of people's minds right now is inflation, right? And so I know you and I have had this conversation, Clint. As a brand, we very strongly feel that horticulture in times of uncertainty generally does very, very well. And so, we're very excited about 2023. We think there's a lot of opportunities, but I'd love to have you dig into a little bit more of how, at a garden center level, what are some suggestions or what are some ways that Homestead is really looking at managing those real-time inflation factors? And so looking at how do you manage mid-season price changes and other changes as they're occurring, because it takes a lot of time and labor to do those things.
So I think one of the things, and it kind of like fits into, the old adages with business, that, preparation is half the issue, right? So one of the things that Homestead is doing significantly different for 2023 than we have in the past is our green goods program. It is actually going to all be pre-booked. So we're actually going in now to begin to see how we can take any inflationary pressures for the future away by looking at how we pre-book. So by pre-booking, by working with our grower network, we're actually able to make sure that we not only secure the product, but we're giving our grower network more confidence that product is already sold. So we're taking part of the market volatility out for them as well by doing pre-book. The other thing we're doing, it's a lot of communication. It's making sure that all the inputs that we have sort of confirmed what those pricing things are. But as far as the in-season part of pricing variability, we're a very fortunate, company that we have a great relationship with our POS company, Epicor. And we do a lot of professional services training with Epicor to make sure that our buyers, our managers, and anybody else who deals with inventory are able to have the tools to be able to update pricing on the spot.
That's great. That's great. And I think that plays well, Clint, as I flip to the next slide of really looking at, as you're looking at pre-booking and as you're looking at selecting your vendors, let's talk a little bit about, we've talked an awful lot about high value, high performance items versus low value, low performance items at the garden center. And maybe can I have you dig into a little bit more of the mindset of what is really driving that at Homestead Gardens?
So one of the things in looking at this particular philosophy, it's actually a way to sort of move beyond looking at a low price point, whether that is a low price point that a retailer is purchasing it or a low price point that a retailer is selling it. One of the things that we know at Homestead Gardens is we want to be a company that is known in our marketplace as having the highest quality that anybody can find around. And to have the highest quality around, we need to make sure that we have the best genetics. We need to make sure that the product is always in bloom. We need to make sure that if we're going to say that Heather is going to be educating our employees so that they can educate the consumers, we need to make sure that those things are all in alignment as well. So when you look at a high value, high performance sort of relationship between a retailer and a vendor, this is where we begin to get into looking at what makes plants retail ready, right? So a relationship in a high value, high performance is where we have product that comes in, it's ready to sell that week. It actually matches all of our financial objectives. So if we're looking at something that needs a 1 week turn in the rotation, so annuals, if we look at vegetables, things like that, we don't really have enough time for those to have to be retagged. We don't have enough time that we need to do things. So sometimes when we buy on price, that might mean that it's because companies don't pre-tag. That means that we don't have enough availability with shipping. So what we really want to do is we want to figure out what our performance metrics are. We want things that are always retail ready. We want things that are in good shape, always in bloom. We want great regularity and stability in shipping and arrival. We want 100% accuracy in delivery rates. We want congenial relationships between drivers and staff. So all of these things, because we're not looking or we think that we're going to be better positioned instead of having a vendor supplier relationship, that we're looking at vendor partnerships. That's where we really believe. We want vendors who want to grow their business. We want them to be as educated as we are. So that's the difference in looking at these high value, high performance. And that's one of the reasons that we so enjoy the relationship with proven winners, is when we look at all of both the tangible and intangible and the direct and indirect assets that are brought to the table to make us a holistic solution. That to me is the very definition of high value, high performance. So it's a tact that we're taking so that we can be market leaders.
And Clint, you've shared a lot with me as we talk, almost weekly. But one of the things that we've talked a little bit about is as you are building those relationships with those vendors, I think you've spent a lot of time in this off season of really looking at, again, making sure that your values and criteria match that of your vendor, and in some cases, really sort of refining that and narrowing that list of vendors to ensure that, again, for simplicity purposes, you're sort of doubling down, for lack of a better term, with those vendors that really fit and meet your criteria. Correct?
Correct. So one of the things that we did this year, which was a first for Homestead Gardens, we did an internal and an external review of our vendors. And this was the first time we had a questionnaire that went out, and it was easy for staff to fill it out. So any staff member who handles plant material coming into the company had an opportunity to weigh in and give their opinion on the vendors that they deal with. So, people were asked, how does the paperwork come in? Is information accurate? Were you able to, update the vendor if there was an issue? So we went back as we looked at some of these things, and we said, this is sort of the 1 to 5, criteria that we had. And, here are some things that we need your company, as we sort of move forward, to begin to help us figure out, how can we do better on this? Whether it was order accuracy, time of day, when we look at the routing of trucks, when we look at the ability to offload items that were sort of organized by the way that they were going to be received inside the building. So it's all of those logistical things. Like, we don't think about the idea that someone who is offloading petunias has to offload them in one order, and then the carts have to be reconfigured to actually logically go on the floor because they have to come in a different direction. So a part of that conversation simply was having the vendor come out and to tour the facility, to actually stand at the dock and to see where the truck parked, and then to walk them through the layout of the greenhouse. And then they're like, oh my gosh, we think that we can save an hour a week per delivery, just in sort of having that vendor visit the garden center and to be able to walk through the loading process and the unloading process. So one of the things that we found is everybody wants great relationships, and people want to be engaged. People want to be heard. People want to be of service to one another. And sometimes we just don't tell them. So now's the time to talk about it. And that's what makes, high value relationships.
Yeah. We've talked a lot too, Clint, about, with this whole pre-book sort of a concept, right? That you have so much say in what your vendor partners carry, but that is a partnership and that is a relationship, and that is built with time. But I think that's something, a lot of garden centers ask, is there flexibility in that? And I'd love to have you speak to that a little bit, because I know you guys have been very clear with sort of not just proven winners, but across the board, what plants do you want to carry that really hit that high value, high performance for the consumer as well?
So we went through and we actually took a position of where are our highest performing items by week, based on sales, based on margin. And we went heavy into those particular areas because it's known quantities. It's not like the same week that you sell geraniums every year is the same week that you're going to sell geraniums every year. It's not like we have a group of people who relocate from another country who, are from the Southern Hemisphere, who typically buy geraniums 6 months later, right? So people buy them at the same time. So I think in getting with that, it was simple enough as putting our sales data in a spreadsheet and sending it to the vendor and basically saying, here's our number. When you're putting your grow plan together, can you count me in on those weeks on these quantities? And people come back and they're like, hey, thanks for letting me know, because now I know to go back to the breeder or the small plant grower or the rooted cuttings or wherever, those original inputs come from. They can increase their order because they have confidence in the system. So the one thing that a pre-book does, which is absolutely incredible, is it not only provides confidence to the relationship between a retailer and the grower, but it also provides confidence and accuracy all along the supply chain. The other thing that we're doing is for us to have the highest quality items and the highest quality goods in our area, we're really looking at this as also an exit strategy. So for items that we know are highest sellers for a 6-week period, we're going to focus on those, and we're not stretching it out. We're not starting too early. We're not staying too late. And, the vendors don't like that either. So we want to really do what we do well.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm going to open a big can of worms now, Clint, and I want to talk about data. And I think, your statement that accurate data is no longer an optional, right? It's a necessity. So let's talk a little bit about some of the data gaps and maybe some of the things that Homestead is doing and some opportunities you see for garden centers in general, not just Homestead Gardens.
So I think that as we look and if we go back to that 18 million consumers, which I'll sort of like jump back and forth here a little bit. One of the things that happened in March of 2020 was when every company thought that the inside of their store was going to be closed. everybody rushed to do e-commerce. And what we found inside horticulture was as quickly as most people rushed to get into e-commerce, they rushed to get out of it. And the reason that they rushed to get out of it, from a business perspective, was that they didn't have data that supported the technology. Whether it was a series of differentiated SKUs, whether there was too much of a workload to do it manually versus doing it integrated. But that 18 million people who came to the category didn't only come for the other reasons that we've touched on earlier, that it solves the body and or helps solve issues with body and soul. People found us because we existed on the internet. We were what came up when somebody said, "How do I find plants near me? How do I find an azalea?" So as everybody was tasked to it. So the thing about the data gaps is where individuals had to exit being able to have an online presence because they were having to manually adapt. There needs to be an automated solution for that. And the only way that these things can be automated is by having complete data. Jessica, we worked with Proven Winners this year because we actually sort of gave visibility on provenwinners.com for items that we had in store. And, one of the ways that we worked together with your technology group was we actually sent a report on a daily basis to your team. But prior to that, we'd actually worked with them, and you have a centralized numbering system. So one of the things that we found of value was that with the centralized nomenclature and your numbering system that you have, we were able to match that data so that we were able to send it to you. So people have to look for ways to have normalized data, that we have to know the difference between, what attributes are actually required. But data is no longer an option because if we're going to be on people's phone, if we're going to be on people's computer, if we're going to be inside people's homes, we have to have data to support whatever platform that we go forward with, whether that is a regular e-commerce store, whether that is social commerce, whether that is selling on Instagram, or whether that is a refined popularity strategy. So whatever we do to get in front of these 18 million people, we have to have better data.
Yeah, I agree, Clint. And we're seeing the same thing on the Proven Winners website. If you were to look at sort of the consumer process, right, as they find Proven Winners, they used to hit provenwinners.com and they would navigate from there. And what we're seeing with all of our web traffic is it's very hyper-focused. So whether Laura from Garden Answer talked about something, or even if their local garden center mentioned Vista Bubblegum as an example, they're going to the specific plant record because at the end of the day, they expect our industry to be just like, Target and some of the other primary retailers of, does my local Target have this specific item? And so they're really looking at that. And so I know we're looking at ways to better leverage and help to show inventory from garden centers, but I can't agree with you more that data is no longer optional. It really is something to look at. So let's move on to, I think one of the things that you've done exceptionally well is the customer, the horticulture customer, the consumer that has shopped at a garden center has changed dramatically again. And part of that is due to COVID. Part of that is due to we have more folks with disposable income entering the marketplace. But let's talk a little bit about personas of the shopper and what you at Homestead have done to create different personas and to target these specific folks and really think about how that message changes to them.
So yes, and one of the ways that we decided on the title for this slide, I think so often, when businesses talk about data, or when businesses talk about the digital world, we talk about it in terms of product. So we think about a SKU, we think about a plant description. We think about the attributes of a plant and the way that those come together in a search. But I think what we want to recognize in sort of the application of this slide in the application of personas is that from cradle to cradle, in sort of this philosophy of business that we live in, the consumer aspect and who our consumers are, that we are in a digital world. And so the same thing that we have to know about Vista bubblegum, right? Or that we have to know about Limelight hydrangea. We have to know that about our core customer. So Homestead did consumer research to look at our existing demographics. And, it used to be 10 years ago, 20 years ago, the demographics that we had access to was we had a zip code. We had home ownership or rental. Like that was it, right? And then 10 years after that, income came into play, where people were able to sort of see the difference in that. So it's much more sophisticated now. But as the data and our ability to sort of triangulate how that data can come forward to what we're doing, we need to use that. So Homestead actually did research about 6 years ago, and we developed personas based on 7 characteristics. So this is a breakout of our loyalist customer, whose name is Lorraine. And she's 65 years old. She's retired. She's married with grandkids, and she's a master gardener. So while we refer to Lorraine as a loyalist, last week when we were in Minneapolis, Jesse Jacobson from Tonkadale, her persona for this, or her name for this particular persona, is a legacy persona. So where we refer to it as loyalist, she refers to it as legacy. So 10 years ago, 20 years ago, this would have been referred to in the demographics of the time as a boomer. So it gets more sophisticated as we go. There are 7 points to this. So we really sort of get into the idea about, what their interests are, what their goals are. You see social activities and really looking at this part of Facebook, sharing photos. One of the things that we understand by the type of customer that she is, she's a researcher, right? And, they adore being here and the classes. So this type of shopper, so it goes back to what, we talked about earlier with being a healer and a solver. So what we actually know from this persona, it is that our main customer at Homestead Gardens wants to connect not only with us as a brand, but they want to connect with our employees to actually get to, the product. So, the typical customer, in looking at the occasion to come, is they shop in the spring for perennials and annuals. They shop at the holiday. They like winter thriving plants, and they like to keep connected with the community. So we have an internal garden club called Golden Spades, which meets the first Thursday of every month. And Lorraine can be counted on to be there. But as more and more people talk about doing digital advertising, and as that becomes more a part of the space for any company to be able to effectively and responsibly invest dollars into a digital marketing campaign, the first thing that somebody is going to ask is, who do you want to contact? And you have to have a persona about that. So this is Lorraine, who is, our loyalist customer. And we do a lot with digital advertising, and we're not the only company that has personas. This is a very practical application that a lot of companies use right now.
Yeah. So, Clint, if a garden center hasn't started this whole process, right? Like, what are the first steps? And sort of, because I know we've got a wide range of folks on the webinar. So, what are the first steps to really start looking and thinking about this in terms of mining that information to better craft your digital marketing?
So I think in looking at it, and for people who are currently working with a digital marketing firm, I mean, they should actually contact that firm and ask them if they can provide help in creating a digital persona. But I think just in doing some of the background work, to look at your regular customers, doing customer surveys, really sort of saying, what are you interested in? Or really finding out from individuals. I mean, I don't know, and you and I have never had this conversation, but, I don't know if Proven Winners, it is providing any sort of persona type information that, retailers could use. But there are other resources out there, and people should access them.
Yeah, we're actually in process of working on that, Clint. We have a lot of data, and it's compiling that. So our marketing director is actually working on that. So I do have a question for you. Are you, and I'm sure you are, looking at and sharing that with other garden centers of here are our personas, what are yours, and how are you interacting and engaging with them? Is that an active process that you all are working on?
So one of the things that we have found is in our persona networking, if you will, we actually have individuals as personas, and other people actually have either family groups as personas, or they have couples as personas. So one of the things that I found that has been unique about our personas is that they're individuals.
Okay, that's interesting. And, the interesting thing to me is I've sat in meetings with your team, and the thing that I love about this isn't just a top tier. The marketing department talks about these personas. Your purchasers and other people within the organization are pointing out Lorraine, or they're pointing out other, individuals that you target. And I thought that was really interesting that your teams are fully integrated with this concept.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Clint, the next slide has just some other examples. So maybe you could run us through. Obviously, we've talked about Lorraine, the loyalist, but who are the other personas that you have at Homestead Gardens?
So we have, Erin, who is in the center at the top, and she's generation beyond Lorraine. We've got Pete, who is a DIY in sort of a Saturday builder. We've got Ashley, and we've got Erin. So here, this is the face of Homestead Gardens, and this is the customer demographic that we, promote to and market to every day, and that we sell to. And it really is quite rewarding to see, when we have sales and when activities, when people come in, that this is what our customer mix looks like.
Yeah, this is exciting stuff. So we're going to keep moving, Clint, because I know we're limited on time, but I wanted to dive into this a little bit because you brought up e-com a little bit earlier, and sort of the mass movement into e-com during COVID. And then sort of, I think folks started to realize, oh my gosh, I've opened a big can of worms, right? And so I want to talk a little bit about, what are your thoughts there? And let's talk a little bit more about, some of those last mile improvements, because I think that's a big topic of discussion.
So, in looking at those last mile improvements, one of the things that we know is most traditional garden centers today are looking to increase foot traffic, right? So it is traffic inside the store. But what most companies all do is deliver product. So when we really look at being able to improve that last mile service, it takes normalized data. It takes our ability to integrate. So in looking at, a portion of this e-commerce sale, e-commerce is not always defined by sort of that purchase click, right? So in sort of that in-store experience with texting, I think a part of customer engagement in e-commerce is, how do we actually move people from a phone call for an inquiry to some sort of answer online, right? So whether you're helping that with a customer transaction in e-commerce, I know that like with social selling, most people have to do that a Shopify site. Well, that sort of conflicts with what might be your normal e-commerce site. So I think one of the things as we look toward 2025 is e-commerce, or the idea of online selling, right? Which can be a different way. It might be agnostic. Maybe there has to be multiple platforms. Maybe there has to be a big platform so that people can sort of review the full offering of what you have. Maybe there is a medium-sized platform that really focuses on high sellers during the season that are just there, that are sort of pop-up stores that you might have. And then maybe we have to have the ability to do social selling based on image marketing. So when we really look at online selling, it's much more dynamic than what we saw even 3 years ago, which was almost one-dimensional. Here, I believe that e-commerce, as we move forward, it's more agnostic. The platforms are much more diversified and are going to rely on a series of APIs in looking at the integration rather than something that is heavy and static. I will touch just, in really looking at texting, just one moment on the bottom here. Where we're going into the future is we have to figure out a way to move people off of a telephone and really looking at texting and texting capabilities. And there are a lot of solutions for a lot of different size companies, but that has to be a part of this engagement and experience.
So Clint, maybe you can dive into that, because there are a lot of questions about texting and really looking at the just when you think about how consumers interact with us, right? Emails, let's face it, I know lots of people that have thousands of unread emails. And so when you think about text, it does provide the unique opportunity, because most people are looking at those texts, especially as you start looking at MMS with the ability to put imagery in there, especially with the plants and the products that we sell. What are you guys doing at Homestead Gardens? What do you think are some additional opportunities or just, growth opportunities that you see in general for garden centers with text?
So Homestead Gardens is exploring. That is the best way to sort of define, texting. But I think that one of the ways that we can conceptualize the way that texting might look in the future for this sort of customer experience or interchange is a lot more like the day that you're going to take a flight on an airplane. Right? So there is one interaction reminding you that it's happening. There's an interaction reminding you that there's a time involved. And then there is the action of doing it, right? So there are basically three interactions that happen there. I think we got to think simpler about all this. This texting and this sort of stuff, it's not like you texting a family member talking about getting together for dinner. It's very simple steps. And, the box channel has certainly perfected it. And we as independent businesses have to do it as well. But Homestead is exploring. We have not mastered or even come up with a solution that we're testing right now.
Yeah, Jeremy had asked in the question and answer segment, just had asked if there was something that you were using. And Jeremy, I think there's a number of garden centers that have dove into text message marketing. What I can do is I will send a separate email to you with a few of those companies that I know some garden centers are utilizing as well. But I do agree with you, Clint. I think that there's a huge opportunity. While I do think it takes time to build that text audience, right? Because it's an opt-in audience and not everyone wants information. I still do think that there's a good segment of our customer base that really wants to hone in, wants more interaction with those key businesses that they support. And so I think it's a unique opportunity for garden centers moving forward. So before we dive into the questions, because I know we're going to have more questions, Clint, and one of the things that we sort of touted the webinar and we talked about were that checklist of what are the things that, garden centers really should be looking for in forward or looking to do in 2023. So what I'd love to have you do is just sort of a quick overview again of those top 6 items that really are opportunities moving forward.
So I think that, and as I mentioned before, it's a real opportunity. It is to go ahead and get your work done for spring of 2023 now. It's as easy as sending a list to your suppliers saying, this is my sales history. This is what I want. Let me pre-book it. Once you sort of do that, you begin to sort of work your way into figuring out who the high value, high performance relationships are versus the low value, low performance. Because once we get into that higher tier, this is where we begin to increase margin. We begin to increase sales through. We begin to reduce scrap. We begin to reduce, our labor to sales ratio, because the consumer is taking more out than we're having to manage internally. Your consumers are your consumers, but you have to know how to market to them. And, we got a lot of value in looking at creating a marketing plan by utilizing the Connect Plus program for Improving Winners. In being able to utilize that and again, in investing in education. I mean, I think that these are all the checklists, but I just cannot stress the desire of our entire vendor mix at Homestead to embrace pre-book. And I know that scares a lot of people, but pre-book is something that can really help people.
Yeah. Thank you, Clint, so much for sharing. I do have a few other questions for you, and they haven't come up in the Q&A yet. But I think a lot of folks are wondering, what are some of those overarching trends that you're seeing at Homestead Gardens, and what do you think are some opportunities in 23? I know we've talked a lot about marketing and about pre-booking, but what are some of those bigger overarching trends? And I know there are a number of them, but maybe one or two that you could extrapolate on.
Well, I think the overarching trend that is going to continue to be here for a period of time, it's environmentalism, right? So whether you and your local community are interpreting environmentalism as an increased use of natives, pollinators, when we look at food gardening, and this is sort of a thing, but if you look, because of environmental issues, at the prospective shortage of tomatoes in the marketplace in the spring of 2023. And we're talking about tomatoes on shelves in grocery stores in that potential shortage. Retail garden centers should really be looking at their entire vegetable category for the spring of 2023. So environmentalism continues to be there. When we look at our loyalist customer, who's older now, and then when we look at sort of Gen Z's, Gen X, and all below, everybody wants flexibility. Everybody wants to go somewhere on the spot. So when we look at self-watering containers, when we look at gardens that are beautiful and they're blooming and they're big and they're fat, but they don't require people to hoe and weed 7 days a week, right? So really impactful gardening methods that require that allow people to enjoy their garden, but still do the other things they love. So it's that commonality between where generations are right now and how they can love our products without having to wrestle with it every day. So that's the two big trends that I actually see are, environmentalism, however that's interpreted by you, and self-watering, self-care sort of gardens that work.
That's awesome. So, Clint, I have to ask you one more question before we sort of end the webinar. The big question for everyone is, what are your thoughts for 23? Are you optimistic about 23? Are you in Homestead Gardens doubling down? What's the thought process?
So we're very optimistic, right? And even though there is going to be a glitch here and there, the one thing that we know is our industry in and of itself has typically fared better than others in times of a recessionary period, however that's defined. But what we have now is we've got 18 million new people. We have an internal migration in the U.S. that has allowed communities to have new incomes, new influxes of cash. We have people, which we don't really know yet, but a different way of the way that they're going to spend their time. But we sell flowers. We sell beauty. We sell things that make people happy. And it's that goodness that we have to continue to build up on and make sure that we preserve for people all across the country. So we're optimistic and we think it's going to be great. We think it might be bumpy, but that this is a good industry and there are good people and great products. So we're very optimistic.
That's great. I second that completely, Clint. We're excited about 2023 and partnerships, and just want to sincerely thank you for sharing of your time and of your knowledge, Clint. It's amazing to just hear some of the things that you all are doing and to learn from you. I know many of you have questions probably for Clint outside of the webinar. What I will be doing is I will send an email out after the webinar with Clint's contact information. He's a wealth of knowledge and information. I know, Clint, if folks have questions, you'd be more than happy to answer those.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. So a couple things. We have some additional webinars still coming up in our fall webinar series. We have one next Wednesday on November 30th. Many of you know that we have a new houseplant program that we call Leaf Joy, and Homestead Gardens has taken part in that. We're very excited about that program because it does offer you, as an independent garden center, the opportunity to sell, plants 52 weeks of the year. We've got some really unique and exclusive genetics for independent garden centers and want to share a little bit more about what the program is, how we've really crafted that specifically with the consumer in mind, and how you can take advantage and sell that program as we move forward into 2023. Couple things. This webinar is recorded. We will have the recording up in about a week. But if you'd like to sign up for the additional webinars in series or find some of the webinar recordings from our past sessions, you're welcome to do that on the URL on the screen. And with that, I just want to sincerely thank you. We appreciate your partnership in your business. We absolutely love our IGC partners, and more than anything, want to wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving and a happy holiday season. And Clint, once again, thank you.
Thank you. Happy holiday.